Jeffrey Dahmer is a well-known serial killer, but how many of you have heard about serial killer Dennis Nilsen? Dennis Nilsen is the Scottish Jeffrey Dahmer, and the parallels between these two men are pretty mind-blowing. Both men were gay loner serial killers who targeted and killed attractive young men and boys within their local gay scene, not because they took a particular pleasure in the act of killing, but because they both wanted ownership of the males they found attractive. Both Dahmer and Nilsen killed for the first time in 1978. Whereas Nilsen's first victim in 1978 was 14-year-old Stephen Holmes, who he lured back to his flat with the promise of beer, Dahmer's first kill in 1978 was teenager Stephen Hicks, who he lured back to his house with the promise of beer. Both Dahmer and Nilsen killed their first victims because they did not want them to leave. Whereas Dahmer struck Hicks over the head with a barbell before strangling him to death, Nilsen merely strangled Holmes to death to prevent him from leaving. Horrifically, both serial killers then copulated with the corpses before burying them beneath areas of their homes. Both Dahmer and Nilsen each killed 2 Stevens among their pile of victims. Both Dahmer and Nilsen began killing their victims regularly because they wanted unresisting bodies that they could freely possess and enjoy. Dahmer kept the severed heads of many of his victims and planned to eventually create an altar of bones. Nilsen would also boil the heads and cook up the body parts of his victims, and would also pose the corpses in grotesque parodies of romantic situations, sitting them in chairs, lying them on beds, and even talking to them. Both Dahmer and Nilsen were shy outcasts as children. Both came from tumultuous families with absent fathers that ended in divorce. Both were extremely obsessed with death from a very young age. Dahmer's father Lionel encouraged Dahmer's interest in dead animals, which they dissected together in the garage. Nilsen's obsession with death occurred after his beloved grandfather died and he was shown his corpse. Both men admitted to having a night where they inappropriately touched their brothers while their brothers slept in the same bed. Both spent their high school years wandering for hours alone in the woods. Both men had extremely active fantasy lives, and both men were severe alcoholics. Both men joined the army and were both stationed in West Germany. Each has been described as having a chilling level of self-control. One of the most disturbing parallels between Dahmer and Nilsen was that they were both almost caught after attacking young Asian males. Nilsen tried to murder 19-year-old Andrew Ho, a student from Hong Kong that he'd brought back to his flat. Ho was able to knock Nilsen unconscious with a candlestick, and he went to the cops, but he was worried about getting in trouble for having homosexual relations at that time, so he didn't press charges and Nilsen was released. Dahmer was nearly caught after witnesses spotted a naked and disoriented 14-year-old Conoric synthensophobe. Witnesses pleaded with cops to investigate further, but Dahmer was able to convince them that Conoric was 18 years old and his boyfriend. Conoric was dead within the hour. Killing for both men was generally done by strangulation, and was simply a means to an end, providing Dahmer and Nilsen with unresisting bodies they could freely fetishize, dominate, manipulate, and enjoy, both sexually and otherwise. Both had an extreme fear of emotional rejection and abandonment. Both were necrophiles who posed and cuddled with their victims post-mortem. Nilsen's apartment number was 23 Cranley Gardens in London. Dahmer's apartment was number 213 in the Oxford Apartments. Whereas Dahmer's entire apartment complex reeked of death, the drains at Nilsen's apartment complex were clogged up with human flesh and bone fragments. Dahmer blamed the smell on his fish dying, and Nilsen blamed the clogged pipes on someone flushing down their Kentucky Fried Chicken. Both men expressed utter relief when they were caught, and were completely forthcoming with every detail of their crimes, with seeming emotional indifference confessing, "If you don't lock me up, I will kill again." Nilsen killed 15 men, and Dahmer killed 17 men, 15 of which he considered intentional. Both Dahmer and Nilsen wanted to know why they committed the horrible crimes that they did. When one of the investigators asked Nilsen why he committed these acts, his response was, "I was hoping you will tell me that." Dennis Nilsen was born in November and died in May. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in May and died in November. Both were severely attacked by inmates, and both men died in prison.